Hello and welcome back to the Castello Sforzesco in the centre of Milan. Absolutely stunning medieval Renaissance fortress, has been here since 12th, 13th century and gone through various phases of rebuild, but a beautiful courtyard here right in the centre with some amazing architecture, which now house lots of museums and galleries featuring lots of artworks of famous sculptors and painters. Great place to come along, but also on a nice day, I'm sure a great place to sit and have a read. So I'm going to pick up with the Wager, Chapter 7, The Gulf of Pain. David Cheap, commander of His Majesty's ship, the Wager, would never turn back. His company continued to weather, and his own body was hollowed out by what he, to avoid the stigma of scurvy, preferred to call rheumatism and asthma. His ship, the first man of war under his charge, was not just deformed with its missing mast, torn sails, and bad leaks. It was alone upon the quaking sea. Despite all this, he said he sailed on, determined to find Anson at the rendezvous. If Cheap failed at this challenge, was he truly a captain after all? Once his goal had been achieved, and once the remaining men in Cheap's party recuperated, they would proceed with the plan that Commodore Anson had confided in him, an assault on Valdivia, a town on the southwestern coast of Chile. Because the Wager was carrying much of the squadron's armaments, the success of the first strike against the Spanish, and perhaps of the entire expedition, depended on him miraculously making it to the rendezvous. The very hopelessness of the situation offered a peculiar human appeal. If Cheap prevailed, he would become a hero, his feats celebrated in the yarns and ballads of seamen. Never again would those landlubbers back home doubt what he was made of. Watch after watch, bale after bale, he continued sailing, scraping, battling, until 3 weeks had passed since his separation from the squadron. With skill and daring and a touch of ruthlessness, he had navigated the Wager around Cape Horn, joining that elite club, and he was now hastening along the Pacific, heading northeast off the Chilean coast of Patagonia. In several days he would arrive at the rendezvous. Imagine Anson's expression when he saw the lost Wager and realized that his former lieutenant had saved the day. Yet the Pacific did not live up to its peaceful name. As the Wager headed north off the coast of Chile, all the previous storms seemed to have been combined into one climatic fury. God was ever the yarn spinner. Some of the men appeared ready to cut and run, just as the officers and crews of the Pearl and the Seven were suspected of doing. But Cheap, his eyes inflamed, his teeth loosening, was unwavering. He demanded that his crew brace the sails, clamber up the masts amid vicious gusts of wind, and work the manual pump, which required lowering saucers on a long chain into the water-filled hold and then hauling them upward, a back-breaking ritual that had to be repeated over and over again. Cheap relied on the midshipman Alexander Campbell to strong-arm the crew and enforce his orders. My attachment to the captain was zealous, Campbell acknowledged. One seaman later shouted curses at the midshipman and vowed retribution. Cheap relentlessly drove the men onward, drove them even as they dumped overboard a growing number of corpses. Let the fate of particular persons be what it will, Cheap proclaimed, but let the honour of our country be immortal. As they forged on, John Byron, who noted Cheap's stubborn defiance of all difficulties, and how he was unfazed by the apprehensions which so justly alarmed all, peered over the edge of the quarterdeck. Ever alert to nature, he noticed, floating on the rushing water, little green strands, seaweed. He anxiously told the gunner, "Bulkley, we can't be far off land." John Bulkley thought that their course was madness. According to Master Clark, the navigator, they remained safely west of the Patagonian coast of Chile, but his dead reckoning had been wrong before, and if they kept on the northeast tack, they might become entangled with an unknown lee shore and not be able to turn around in time to avoid wrecking. The carpenter Cummins remarked that given the condition the ship was in, she was not fit to come in the land, especially with all our men being sick. Bulkley went and asked Lieutenant Baines, the superior officer on duty, why they did not alter their course and turn west back out to sea. The lieutenant seemed evasive. When Bulkley pressed him again, Baines replied that he had spoken to Cheap and that the captain was intent on making it to the rendezvous in time. I would have you go to him. He may be persuaded by you, Baines said faithlessly. Bulkley had no need to seek a meeting with Cheap. The captain, undoubtedly hearing of the gunner's grumblings, soon summoned him and asked, "What distance do you reckon yourself off the land?" "About 60 leagues," Bulkley responded, which was roughly 200 miles. But the currents and swells were driving them rapidly eastward towards the coastline, he noted, adding, "Sir, the ship is a perfect wreck. Our mizzen-mast gone, and all our people down." For the first time, Cheap divulged Anson's secret orders, and he insisted that he would not deviate from them and threaten the operation. He believed a captain must fulfill his duties. "I am obliged and determined." Bulkeley thought the decision was a very great misfortune, but he bowed to his superior's orders, leaving the captain alone with his clacking cane. On May 13, at 8 in the morning, Byron was on watch when several of the pulleys for the foresails broke. As the carpenter Cummins hurried forward to inspect them, thunderclouds cloaking the horizon parted ever so slightly, and in the distance he could see something shadowy and misshapen. Was it land? He approached Lieutenant Baines, who squinted but didn't see anything. Maybe Baines was suffering from blindness induced by lack of vitamin A, or maybe it was Cummins' eyes that had been deceived. After all, Baines reckoned that the ship was still more than 150 miles from shore. He told Cummins that it was impossible for him to have discerned land, and he made no report of the sighting to the captain. By the time Cummins told Byron about what he thought he had seen, the sky was again subsumed in darkness, and Byron couldn't see any land himself. He wondered whether he should inform the captain, but Baines was second in command, and Byron was a mere midshipman. "It's not my place," he thought. Later that day, at 2 in the afternoon, with only 3 seamen on the watch, Bulkeley had to go aloft himself to help lower one of the yards on the foremast. While the ship bucked like some stupendous wild creature, he slithered up the rigging. The gale whipped against his body and the rain pricked his ears. Up he went, up, 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 until he reached the yard, which rocked with the ship, nearly plunging him into the water before being lifted back into the sky. He held on desperately, looking out of the world before him, and that's when, as he recalled it, I saw the land very plain. There were enormous craggy hills, and the Wager was barreling toward them, propelled by westerly winds. Bulkeley raced down the mast and across the slippery deck to warn the captain. Cheap moved immediately into action. "Sway the foreyard up and set the foresail," he cried to the half-human figures wandering about. Then he ordered the men to execute a jibe, turning the ship around by swinging its bow away from the wind. The helmsman, there was only one available, cranked the double wheel. The bow began arcing downward, but then the gale caught the sails from behind at full force, and the hull surfed the enormous waves. Cheap looked on in alarm as the ship headed faster and faster towards the rocks. He ordered the helmsman to keep cranking the wheel and the other men to tend to the rigging, and just before a collision was inevitable, the bow swung farther around a full 180 degrees, and the sails flung violently to the opposite side of the ship, completing the jibe. The Wager was now running parallel to the coastline on a southward trajectory. Yet, because of the westerly wind direction, Cheap was unable to point farther out to sea, and the Wager was being dragged toward the shore by the waves and the currents. The landscape of Patagonia revealed itself, jagged and jumbled, with rocky islets and gleaming glaciers, with wild forests creeping up mountainsides and cliffs plunging straight into the ocean. Cheap and his men were trapped in a bay known as Golfo de Penas, the Gulf of Sorrows, or as some prefer, the Gulf of Pain. Cheap thought they would claw their way out, but the topsail suddenly blew right off the yards. Seeing his despairing men struggling to fix the rigging in the forecastle, he decided to go and help, to show them where was still a way out. Rashly, bravely, he rushed toward a bow, a bull storming into the gale and spray, and it was then, unsteadied by a wave, that he made a misstep, one small misstep, and began to fall into an abyss. He had tumbled through a ripped-open hatchway, plummeting about 6 feet before smacking the oaken deck below. He hit so hard that the bone in his left shoulder snapped and protruded from his armpit. The men carried him into the surgeon's cabin. I was taken up very much stunned and hurt with violence of the fall. Cheap noted he wanted to get up so that he could save the ship and his men, but the pain was overwhelming, and it was the first moment in so long that he had laid down to rest. The surgeon, Walter Elliot, gave him opium, and for once Cheap was at peace, sailing into the ether of his dreams. At 4:30 a.m. on May 14, Byron, who was left on deck, felt the Wager judder in the darkness. Midshipman Campbell, sounding suddenly that the child that he was, asked, "What was that?" Byron peered into the storm. It was now so dense, dreadful beyond description, as he put it, that he could no longer make out even the ship's bow. He wondered whether the Wager had been blindsided by a massive wave. But the blow had come from underneath the hull. It was, he realized, a sunken rock. The carpenter Cummins jolted awake in his cabin and came to the same conclusion. He hurried to inspect the damage with his mate, James Mitchell, who for once was not surly. While Cummins waited by a hatch, Mitchell scurried down a ladder into the hold, shining his lantern over the planks. No burst of water, he yelled up. The planks were intact. As the waves thumped the ship, though, it lunged forward and struck more rocks. The rudder shattered, and an anchor weighing more than 2 tons crashed through the ship's hull, leaving a gaping hole in the wager. The ship began to teeter, rolling farther and farther over, and panic took hold. Some of the sick men, who had not appeared on the watch for 2 months, staggered onto the deck with blackened skin and bloodshot eyes, rising from one deathbed to another. In this dreadful situation, Byron observed the wager lay for some little time, every soul on board looking upon the present minute as his last. Another mountainous wave swept the ship, and she lurched onward, stumbling through a minefield of rocks with no rudder to steer her, and with the sea pouring through the hole. The carpenter's mate Mitchell cried, 6 foot of water in the hold, and an officer reported the ship was now full of water up to the hatches. Byron glimpsed, and perhaps more terrifyingly heard, the surrounding breakers, thunderous waves crashing everything in their jaws. They were all around the ship. Where was the romance now? Many of the men prepared to die. Some fell to their knees, reciting prayers in the spray. Lieutenant Baines retreated with a bottle of liquor. Others, Byron noted, became bereaved of all sense like inanimate logs, and were bandied to and from by the jerks and rolls of the ship, without exerting any efforts to help themselves. He added, so terrible was the scene of foaming breakers around us that one of the bravest men we had could not help expressing his dismay at it, saying it was too shocking a sight to bear. The man tried to throw himself over the railing, but was restrained. Another seaman stalked the deck, waving his cutlass and screaming that he was the King of England. One veteran sailor, John Jones, tried to galvanize the men. My friends, he shouted, let us not be discouraged. Did you ever see a ship amongst the breakers before? Let us try to push her through them. Come, lend a hand. Here is a sheet. Here is a brace. Lay hold. I don't doubt, but we may save our lives. His courage inspired several officers and crewmen, including Byron. Some grabbed ropes to set the sails. Others frantically pumped and bailed the water. Bulkley attempted to maneuver the ship by manipulating the sails, pulling them one way and then the other. Even the helmsman, despite his inoperable wheel, remained at his post, insisting that it would be unbecoming to desert the wager as long as it stayed afloat. And astonishingly, that much maligned ship kept going. Hemorrhaging water, she sailed on through the Gulf of Pain, without a mast, without a rudder, without a captain on the quarterdeck. The men quietly cheered her on. Her fate was theirs, and she fought with all she was worth, proudly, defiantly, nobly. At last she crashed into a cluster of rocks and began ripping apart. The 2 remaining masts started to fall and were cut down by the men before they could pull the ship entirely over. The bowsprit cleaved, windows burst, tree nails popped, planks shattered, cabins collapsed, decks caved in. Water flooded the lower portions of the ship, snaking from chamber to chamber, filling nooks and crannies. Rats scurried upward. The men who had been too sick to leave their hammocks drowned before anyone could rescue them. As the poet Lord Byron wrote in Don Juan of a sinking ship, it made a scene men do not soon forget, for they always remember that what breaks their hopes or hearts or heads or necks. The wager, having improbably survived this far, offered one final gift to its inhabitants. Providentially, we struck fast between 2 great rocks. John Byron noted, sandwiched, the wager did not sink completely, at least not yet, and as Byron climbed to a high point on the vessel's ruins, the sky cleared, enough for him to see beyond the breakers. There, shrouded in mist, was an island. That's the end of part 2 of the book, The Wager, and we'll move on to part 3, which is entitled Castaways, from perhaps a different destination. Come and join me, the book traveller, at my next stop. Have a great day.